Le capitalisme engendre une dynamique permanente d'accumulation, de crise et d'innovation.
I believe that open markets and free enterprise are the best imaginable force for improving human wealth and happiness.
Je pense que les forces sociales et politiques sont les forces centrales dans la dynamique du capitalisme.
Did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism?
Is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed?
How would Smith see the economic world around us?
I think Keynes would have said the problem is the hole in the economy.
Hayek really wrote The Road to Serfdom as a warning.
You always have to be careful with Marx about the one-liners.
Polanyi, for me, was an intellectual earthquake.
I mean, if I had to stereotype Ricardo, I would say he would look like George Soros.
Si vous retournez chez Adam Smith, Marx, Schumpeter, vous avez des embryons de mécanismes vous permettant de comprendre la crise actuelle.
We were told that capitalism is the product of big thinkers and big ideas. But is it true? How did ideas shape our lives? What is their relation to reality? Can they help us understand today's economic crisis, let alone the future of capitalism? Buried in the dunes are the remnants of the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia and their secrets, the dawn of our economic history.
If you're looking at the origins of all of the techniques of enterprise, where was the first interest charge, the first trade contracts, the first money, prices, the first accounting, all of these were developed in a particular part of the world, Sumer in Babylonia, in what is today southern Iraq, and they were all developed by the temples and the palace.
Athens, 2012, 5,000 years later, and the most potent symbol of our current economic crisis. A city and a country in a state of shock, forced into austerity programs in exchange for loans.
After 2 or 3 years of this austerity program, that is of the shock politics, we are facing an economic disaster.
What causes civilizations to disappear and their economies to collapse? What connects modern Greece to ancient Sumer? There was one economic historian who proposed that the answers may be buried with the ruins of ancient civilizations. Economist Kari Polanyi is back in Vienna, tracing the footsteps of her father. Karl Polanyi was born in Vienna in 1886 and grew up in Budapest. He contracted typhus in the First World War and came to Vienna in 1919 as a refugee after the short-lived Hungarian Republic, which he had supported, was crushed.
Ja, bitteschön. My father was a journalist, and he worked for a weekly economics journal called Der Österreichische Volkswirt. And of course, so there was a deadline, and the copy, he had to finish his copy, his columns, by Thursday night. And he used to smoke. And this room was, you could not see from one side of the room to the other. It was just filled with smoke.
Vienna, once the capital of an empire, was in the 1920s a politically divided city in a country struggling with economic chaos.
My father was living in a Vienna where there was massive unemployment, where there was a very strong socialist party. And they say the Socialist Party of Austria was elected in Vienna from 1918 in every single election until the Civil War.
Karl Polanyi was immersed in Vienna's politics and its socialist movement.
We're going to the Karl Marx Hof. It was the most avant-garde social housing in all of Europe. Vienna in the 1920s, socialist Vienna, managed to turn the class relationship around. That, of course, is what upset Hayek and company, because the financing for the social housing was by taxing the private housing, the private residential housing.
In 1934, this experiment was brutally put to an end.
Civil war flares up suddenly in Austria. The government, deciding to suppress the socialists, countered a general strike by martial law. The strongholds in which the Schutzbund, or Socialist Defense League, hold out are huge blocks of flats built for the Viennese workers by the Socialist Council of the city. The strength of the buildings enables them to prolong resistance for several days, and artillery has to be brought into action against them.
It made a profound impression on me, and I think it was the formative event, I think, of my life, because I have known which side I'm on ever since.
Karl Polanyi left Vienna a year earlier, after being dismissed from his job because of his political beliefs. After the crushing of the Austrian Socialist Party, his then 10-year-old daughter Kari followed him to England. In 1944, Germany and most of Europe are in ruins. Intellectuals like Karl Polanyi had been trying to understand the causes of the collapse of European civilization and to lay a path out of the rubble. For Karl Polanyi, it was a chain of events that began in the 19th century with the faith in the self-regulated free market.
Our thesis is that the old idea of a self-adjusting market implied a stark utopia. Such an institution could not exist for any length of time without annihilating the human and natural substance of society. It would have physically destroyed man and transformed his surroundings into a wilderness. Karl Polanyi, The Great Transformation.
Polanyi's book was translated into dozens of languages, and his ideas found an audience among the new breed of students in North America. They saw their calling in rethinking capitalism after the Second World War.
I came to the University of Chicago in the year 1950, and I suppose my generation had certain interesting goals or concerns. At the top of the list was the question, would we be back in a major depression that we had come through in the 1930s?
Beyond the facade of the skyline swept under the city's rug, teeming millions, never more than a copper coin from starvation.
The second was a new world was opening up. What about third world countries? What could we do for them?
Somewhere east of Suez, where the best is like the worst, a crowded continent swarms with people, with palaces and poverty.
What about inequality? Inequality between countries, inequality within countries. These were the cogent, the compelling issues of my generation at that time. And economics seemed on the surface to be the entry point to address these issues. But once you entered economics, you found yourself in a maze. It was an intellectual maze with no exit. You began with the basic proposition that the economic problem is scarcity in the world, that there's not enough to give everybody as much of everything as they would like. Because the world's resources were limited, they had to be allocated. The best way to allocate them, we were told, was the market economy. You were boxed into the market economy, and it was a form of intellectual alienation from the world's real issues. Economic theory was very much like a meat grinder that turns out hamburger. You put in old bread, onions, ground meat, whatever you had in the fridge, and you ground it together, and whatever else happened, it always came out hamburger. And that was the problem with economics, that wherever you began, you ended up with the market economy. Eternal, omnipresent, inescapable, and totally binding. I felt intuitively that I had to break out. I left in disappointment and despair from Chicago and went to Columbia. In Columbia, it was quite by chance that I saw a course called General Economic History from a man I had never heard of, called Karl Polanyi.
The course that Karl Polanyi taught at Columbia University was based on his own inquiry into the market economy as an ideological system, a view of society organized along the logic of the market.
To help us get a glimpse into the future of this unfinished world of ours, there has been created for the New York World's Fair a thought-provoking exhibit of the developments ahead of us. The greater and better world.
The Future of Capitalism, as depicted in a General Motors-sponsored exhibit in the 1939 World's Fair, a corporate vision of freedom and human needs fulfilled by the free market.
Come. Let's travel into the future. What will we see?
Firebird 2 to Control Tower. We are about to take off on the highway of tomorrow. Stand by.
It is the result of a market view of society, wrote Karl Polanyi, which equated economics with contractual relationships and contractual relationships with freedom.
The Great Transformation, for me, was an intellectual earthquake. The earth opened up. It was that kind of an amazing insight into the coming of the market economy in lockstep with the Industrial Revolution and introducing a new protagonist which had never been introduced before. Polanyi indicated in The Great Transformation that there was another player in the economy, and not simply market forces, but society itself. What he meant was that prior to modern times and the coming of the market economy, most economic transactions were under the supervision and under the rule of some social structure, whether it was the church, whether it was the town council, or whether in tribal societies it was the norms developed from kinship and custom. He meant, therefore, that in most of history, the economy was embedded in society. Social norms had priority over economic activities.
This is how the American filmmaker D.W. Griffith imagined Babylon in his classic 1916 film Intolerance. Babylon was one of the ancient societies that Polanyi had studied. He felt that these ruins in the desert held clues, not only to ancient civilizations, but also to how they viewed their economies.
They discovered from ancient Babylonia, that is modern Iraq, a number of tablets that were the contracts that had been made for trade from the palace to the outlying areas.
I have here 5 tablets which relate to ancient economy and to the economic development. This rather big tablet here is a ledger of animals available for agricultural purposes from the time of the Ur-3 period, that's at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, and it shows that the bureaucracy at the time ended up with ledger-like tablets like this, recording all kinds of economic activities.
From these clay tablets discovered in modern Iraq, people immediately concluded business is as old as mankind. And if there was a business, it meant the kind of business we knew, buying and selling, profit-making, and so on.
These tablets are from a period where we think that the economy was more based on the temple and the palace and less economic activity on the private sector.
The traders were what we would call today civil servants. Their income came not from the profits on the trade. Their income came from the salaries they made. We have mistaken the nature of this trade. It is trade, but not the kind of trade that we are involved in. It was one indication that we were caught in a bind in economic history, that whenever we saw any evidence of trade, and trade is as old as mankind, we assumed business. We fell back on Adam Smith's instinctive notion that mankind has an inherent propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. In other words, put it differently, the market economy is built in as a human instinct. It was out of this kind of vice that Polanyi tried to escape.
saw a way out of the grip of this vice in the study of ancient societies. Societies whose economies were under the control of social norms and regulations, where money and debt were treated differently than they are today.
In Sumer and Babylonia, people who did owe the debt were like owing the price for a fine. They literally could be reduced to bondage to the creditor. And in time, they could lose their land rights. In Sumer, every new ruler would proclaim a clean slate. And the clean slate would, number one, free the debt bond servants. Number two, return the land that had been forfeited to creditors. And three, would annul the debts. This was the law that the Jews in captivity picked up from Babylonia, and the Hebrew practice of Duror had exactly the same three items. So you restore the normal equity way of producing within the economy, the way things were before.
If you don't mind, I can try to give you a little bit of the text. So it says here, regarding the matter of the wife of the Rabbi Sisi'e, that's an official, about which you wrote to me thus, her case concerning the 3.5 minas of silver is settled, but she refuses to take the silver.
We now have hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets that tell us who owed the early debts and who were the debts owed to. Almost all debts were owed to the public sector, to the palace and the temple and to their collectors. If you had the government as the main entrepreneur and creditor, then it was easy to cancel the debts for the Near East because you were canceling debts owed to yourself. What became much more difficult in classical antiquity was when the debts were owed to private creditors. Rome was the first major economy not to cancel the debts, and the result is that by the 2nd century of our era, 1/4 of Rome's population was reduced to slavery and bondage.
If you look at revolts, insurrections, revolutions, there have been more insurrections about debt, I would hazard to guess, than any other single issue in human history. Slavery, serfdom, feudal arrangements, caste arrangements, any form of inequality you want to name. People occasionally revolt, but with debt they revolt regularly. What is a debt, after all? It's a contract between two equal parties not to be equal anymore until one of them pays the money back. But it implies that you could be equal. And that is actually, I suspect, part of the reason it can become so explosive.
It's a long way from the fall of the Roman Empire to Europe after the 2008 economic crash. However, the issue of debt is as important now as it was then, and how society deals with it takes us back to Karl Polanyi.
Στη σημερινή ειδησιογραφία ξεχωρίζει ασφαλώς το τραγικό συμβάν.
A 77-year-old Greek man took his life in front of a crowd
Plusieurs études révèlent une augmentation des dépressions et suicides en Grèce où la crise économique et sociale paupérise des pans entiers de la...
On the 4th of April 2012, a 77-year-old retired pharmacist shot himself to death as a protest against the cuts in his pension. The cuts were part of the severe austerity that Greece was forced to accept in exchange for more loans, intended to help it avoid bankruptcy.
Η αρχή λοιπόν ξεκινάει με ένα τέλος. Αυτό μου έστειλε ο πατέρας μου την Τετάρτη το πρωί στις 8:30 ώρα στο κινητό μου τηλέφωνο. Τέλος, αυτό ήταν το μήνυμά του. Αμέσως κινητοποιήθηκα, τον πήρα τηλέφωνο τόσο στο κινητό όσο και στο σταθερό στο σπίτι, δεν μπόρεσα να τον βρω. Κατέβηκα στους αμπελοκήπους, στο σπίτι του, μπήκα μέσα και είδα το ιδιόχειρο σημείωμά του. Επειδή έχω μια ηλικία που δεν μου δίνει την ατομική δυνατότητα δυναμικής αντίδρασης. Δεν βρίσκω άλλη λύση από ένα αξιοπρεπές τέλος πριν αρχίσω να ψάχνω στα σκουπίδια για τη διατροφή μου.
We are facing an economic disaster. We have an official unemployment rate of 22%, which means that the real unemployment rate must be around 30%. We are at the brink of a humane catastrophe. At this time that we are speaking, there are at least 20,000 people seeking food and other necessary things in the garbage.
When it was insisted that Greece honor its commitment, an economic crisis developed into a social and political one.
Democracy was always a very insecure, imperfect, and precarious system. But never before has democracy been at such a peril as it is now. I come from a country, from Greece, where the political elites have disappeared. They have lost all legitimacy. It's not just that the government has lost legitimacy, every single political movement has lost legitimacy. And this is a major, major turnaround for a country in which democracy was born. The only beneficiaries are the Nazis, because the serpent's egg hatches in this environment of bankruptocracy and loss of hope.
Γιατί ο κόσμος πεινάει, δεν έχει δουλειές, έχουμε γεμίσει λαθρομετανάστες. Κατάλαβες τι γίνεται. Πρέπει να φύγουν όλοι από εδώ πέρα. Ή με το καλό ή με το κακό. Και θα φύγουνε, να είσαι σίγουροι γι' αυτό.
So with such a social and economic price to be paid, why was bankrupt Greece forced to continue to pay its debt?
Is this strange moral power that debt has over us. It can seem to justify anything. What is it about debt that seems to trump any other morality? The more I research the matter, I realize that this kind of moral confusion, this moral conflict over debt, goes back thousands of years. People have been having these kind of arguments forever. And I think the reason why is because, well, what is a debt? A debt's a promise. But in a way, it's a very weird kind of promise. I even say it's a perversion of a promise. Because it's a promise that has been suffused with this kind of combination of mathematics and violence.
This is the true shocking story of Scarface Al Capone, who stalked out of Chicago to take America by the throat.
This is why the mafia, for example, always tries to turn everything into a debt when they're collecting it to moralize it. The fact that it is a promise makes it seem sacred in a way that other relations of, to put it frankly, extortion don't. And in fact, If you look at history, what you find is that debt is the most effective means ever created to take what is essentially a relationship of violent extortion and make it seem moral. And not only to make it seem moral, to make it seem like it's actually the victims who are somehow morally to blame.
Let's talk about a person. This person could be anyone. Let's call him Alex. Let's make things more complicated. Let's say Alex is Greek. Based on the stories you hear, Alex is also a lazy, cheating, ungrateful, helpless, corrupt, violent, rude, racist, tax-evading, troublemaking, thieving vandal that lives with his mother. Well, the stories say it. So it must be true.
Debts are always negotiable if they're between equals. People who you consider equal in status, of course debts can be renegotiated. In fact, what we saw in 2008 is if you're American Insurance Group, if you're Bank of America, if you're Citibank, they're willing to write off trillions of dollars worth of debt by waving magic wands of one sort or another. They have no problem forgiving debt. So, how is it that American Insurance Group can have their debts written off and Greece can't?
Clap on, clap off, clap on, clap off.
The clapper lets you turn capitalism on or off, however you choose. Don't trouble yourself with a complicated socialist revolution. Just clap on, clap off. Clap on when times are good and you make the profit. Clap off when times are bad. Just clap off the free market and the glorious state will provide.
The only possible explanation is that people assume that the kind of people who are in American Insurance Group are people like them. And in fact, if you look at world history, what you realize is that debts between equals are fundamentally different than debts between the powerful and the powerless.
So what had happened? When did debt become a supposedly purely economic issue? When did the economy surpass social relationships? According to Karl Polanyi, it was the reorganization of society during the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, when for the first time in history, labor, land, and money were transformed into commodities. But labor, land, and money, he wrote, are obviously not commodities. Labor is only another name for human activity, which goes with life itself.
Le marché a sa propre logique s'il a des biens tout à fait spécifiques, normaux, liés par l'échange. Mais la société entre en risque lorsque le travail lui-même devient une marchandise. L'argument polanien, si on transforme complètement le travail en une marchandise, la société risque de s'effondrer sur elle-même. Deuxième intuition polanienne, la monnaie.
Money is merely a token of purchasing power, Karl Polanyi wrote.
La monnaie est trop sérieuse pour être laissée à l'initiative de banquiers privés. À nouveau, deuxième intuition polanienne, le régime monétaire doit être garanti du comportement opportuniste des gens privés. Troisième intérêt de Polanyi, la nature n'est pas un acteur comme les autres.
Land is only another name for nature, which is not produced by man.
Illusion, on peut gouverner la nature par un mécanisme de marché. Alors que s'il y a des processus irréversibles, très compliqués de réchauffement climatique, le système de prix sera incapable. Et à nouveau, troisième marchandise fictive de Polanyi. Et vous voyez très bien que Polanyi devrait être le personnage du siècle actuel, puisqu'il s'agit de réinsérer ces trois marchandises, le travail, la monnaie et la nature, dans une société.
Society's problems begin, according to Polanyi, by pretending that these commodities will behave as if they are real. Greek debt illustrates the fatal consequences. Its story begins here in Frankfurt. Most of the Greek debt is owed to German banks.
Creditors will always try to get their money back. And effectively, having lent all this money, they're demanding it back. So what are they doing? They're trying to extend these loans, impose more taxes, impose privatizations of Greek assets in order to get the money back.
400 people have been detained in the Eurozone's financial capital after clashes broke out there on a second day of anti-austerity protests.
Greece was offered a bailout in order to enable it to pay its creditors. More loans in exchange for austerity measures and the privatization of public assets.
There was no bailout for Greeks, or for the Irish, or for the Portuguese. What there was a cynical attempt to transfer the losses from German banks onto the shoulders of German taxpayers.
Seen from a Greek perspective, Northern European countries wanted to shield their banks from the devastating losses they would incur if Greece failed to pay its debt.
In May 2012, we have this remarkable example of bankruptocracy European style. The Greek state borrowed from the bailout fund, which was backed, of course, by German taxpayers. Now, what happened to this money? Was it used in order to stimulate the Greek economy? In order to pay for unemployment benefits, given that unemployment had doubled from 10 to 20% and now it's 25%? No, not one penny went into the Greek economy in any shape or form. That money, the 4 billion, was used in order to repay the European Central Bank for bonds of the Greek state that it had purchased. The ECB, the European Central Bank, had purchased these bonds at a discount. But when those bonds matured in May of 2012, the European Central Bank demanded the full price, the full face value of those bonds. So Greece had to borrow effectively from Germany in order to give to the ECB a sum of money which was effectively well above the cost to the ECB of these bonds.
We have to compliment the government and therefore also the people of Greece in the perseverance of going through these difficult times and going through difficult measures that were inevitable to be taken.
I think bailout was a fantastic marketing ploy, and it was anything but a bailout. Effectively, it is keeping the patient alive, keeping Greece solvent without going for a default. Because if we did have a default, all the banks and the creditors would lose out. By giving this so-called bailout, you extend and pretend that Greece is solvent and can pay this money back, and it allows you to buy time to try to extract as much as money back through taxes or through privatizations.
Es ist richtig, man könnte, wenn man zynisch wäre, sogar sagen, die Banken haben den Kommunismus für sich entdeckt. Solange die Geschäfte gut gehen, machen sie Profite, große Bonuses, alles bestens. Wenn die Geschäfte schlecht gehen oder gar ein Kollaps droht, sind sie too big to fail, zu groß, um zu scheitern. Und insofern, was immer sie tun, es scheint die Sonne und es regnet Manna. Das ist, könnte man ja nicht nur zynischerweise so sagen. Insofern hat die These an der Oberfläche etwas für sich. Der Kapitalismus als Produktionsweise geht sehr viel tiefer. Das ist nicht nur, ob Banken ausgekauft werden oder nicht. Man muss hinzufügen, was wäre die Konsequenz gewesen? Hätte ich die Banken rausgekauft, wenn ich in der Regierung gewesen wäre? Ja. Warum? Weil wir es mit einer Krise zu tun haben, die, wenn es zu einem massiven Bankenkollaps geführt hätte, und das wäre gekommen, wenn es die Bailout-Pakete nicht gegeben hätte, also wenn es die massive staatliche Intervention mit Hunderten von Milliarden Euros, Dollars, Yuans, Yens, was auch immer. Wenn es das nicht gegeben hätte, hätte es einen massiven Bankenkollaps mit einem massiven Zusammenbruch der Weltwirtschaft nach sich gezogen. Diese Konsequenzen, die kann niemand wollen. Das sind wir uns hoffentlich klar.
Polanyi also anticipated the havoc caused by what he called the fiction of money as a commodity. It would prove as disastrous to business as flood and drought in primitive societies, he wrote. No society could stand the effect of such a system of crude fiction.
The story of the Great Transformation is the story of pushback, that society became an important protagonist. And this was novel, because for those who were involved in economics, individualism was the key. There was no society.
Shopping cart of worldly treasure, living lightly on the road.
It is, on the one hand, my father's concept of the disembedded economy. The idea that capitalism has disembedded the economic life from the social base, or rather has transformed the social base to serve the economy, so that economic relations begin to govern, the way in which we relate to each other in society.
The golden era of consumption. It is so important that protecting this era has become the top priority for the materials economy. That's why after 9/11, when our country was in shock and President Bush could have suggested any number of appropriate things, to grieve, to pray, to hope. No, he said to shop, to shop. We have become a nation of consumers.
In my father's perspective, it is more the other way around, that the society is the base and the economy rests in a way on a society, and when those links disappear and when it is disembedded from that society and assumes a life of its own and drives what we do and how we work and how we consume and how we think, we ultimately have an unsustainable system, because it eats out the social relations and also the relations to the natural environment.
In Greece, the place where Dimitri Christoulas shot himself has become a shrine. His funeral turned into a political demonstration.
Polanyi, in The Great Transformation, pictured society as an irresistible force, meaning the coming of new market institutions, running up headlong against an immovable object, which was society itself. And the reason one ran into the other is because the new market economy cast a kind of a net covering everything.
Αυτό, πατέρα, δεν το άντεξες. Σου ήταν αδιανόητο να σκοτώνουν την ελευθερία, τη δημοκρατία, την αξιοπρέπεια. Σου ήταν αδιανόητο να ορθώνουν γύρω μας το πλοίο του πιο σκληρού οικονομικού και κοινωνικού apartheid. Σου ήταν αδιανόητο να εκχωρούν την ανεξαρτησία και να παραδίδουν τα κλειδιά της πατρίδας μας. Σου ήταν αδιανόητο η Ελλάδα να μην αναγνωρίζει τα παιδιά της και τα παιδιά της να μην αναγνωρίζουν την Ελλάδα. Σου ήταν αδιανόητη η κτηνοδία του καπιταλισμού να περιδιαβαίνει τις ζωές μας και γύρω μας να μην συμβαίνει τίποτε.
Ποιος τη ζωή μου, ποιος την κυνηγά, να τη ξεμοναχιάσει μες στη νύχτα.
What we're living through right now is just dramatized conflict between democracy and the market. My father was saying there is a problem. There is a contradiction between capitalism and democracy. Capitalism and democracy, we have become used to, presented to us as complements. The two things go together. But that is, on closer examination, not really the case. Not when the capitalism takes the form of this gross financialization and basic capture of the political process. How many meetings we've had of Merkel and Sarkozy and the governor of the European Central Bank, and they burn the midnight oil, and they come make a big decision as to how they're going to solve it. And then they go to sleep, and then they wake up to find out in the morning what the market has to say.
Stock markets rallied this week after EU leaders reached an unexpected degree of consensus.
We have whole societies with democratic institutions, we have democratically elected leaders, but they are powerless in light of the judgment of the market.
À l'observateur contemporain, il y a vraiment un paradoxe. D'où vient ce pouvoir de la finance? Il vient du fait suivant. Les électeurs votent de temps en temps. Tous les 5 ans pour la présidence, tous les 5 ans pour le Parlement, régulièrement au niveau local. Mais les marchés financiers, tous les jours, toutes les 20 secondes, évaluent le coût de refinancement de la dette publique.
Je suis pas sûr que le capitalisme financier d'aujourd'hui soit forcément différent de ce point de vue-là que le capitalisme industriel du 19e siècle. Ce qui est vrai, en revanche, c'est que le nouveau, disons, capitalisme financier mondialisé d'aujourd'hui contient un élément qui, là, était absolument absent du 19e siècle ou même de la première mondialisation financière jusqu'en 1914, qui est un niveau d'opacité financière et d'enchevêtrement des positions de possession croisées entre pays totalement hallucinant. C'est-à-dire que la structure de la propriété financière était beaucoup plus simple en 1900-1910, où il y avait en gros beaucoup plus de détention directe de titres financiers d'un pays sur l'autre. Aujourd'hui, la situation est beaucoup plus compliquée parce qu'on a, à travers un système d'intermédiation financière beaucoup plus sophistiqué, ces jeux de détention croisée entre pays créent un sentiment de dépossession chez les populations qui, je pense, est une des parties les plus inquiétantes du capitalisme actuel et qui n'est pas qu'un sentiment de dépossession, qui est aussi une réalité puisque chaque pays, finalement, se retrouve détenu. Enfin, les entreprises de chaque pays, l'immobilier de chaque pays, la dette publique de chaque pays est détenue à 50 ou parfois 60-70% par d'autres pays. Alors en fait, chacun détient les autres, parfois sans s'en rendre compte.
For Adam Smith, a free market was a market that was free of rentiers, meaning people who received income without working for it. Today, a free market means freedom for rentiers, for the landlords, for the bankers, and what's called the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, which is exactly the opposite of everything Adam Smith and subsequent classical economists were all about.
Karl Polanyi died in 1964. His ashes were interred in Budapest, the homeland he had left 45 years earlier.
There has been such a renaissance. His ideas are more alive than ever. The economy has to be subordinated. The economy is important, but it cannot override and colonize, if you wish, all other aspects of our social life and our society.
D'abord, la première clé pour l'avenir, c'est simplement qu'il y a plusieurs futurs possibles. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas de force purement économique qui détermine la dynamique de la répartition des richesses. Il y a une multitude d'histoires possibles dans les différents pays. Et donc l'avenir n'est pas écrit. Si on veut vraiment trouver une clé, et résumer par une clé possible, une des dynamiques pour l'avenir qu'on apprend grâce à l'histoire, c'est cette idée du rendement du capital structurellement plus fort que le taux de croissance. Si vous avez les plus riches milliardaires de la planète dont le patrimoine progresse 3-4 fois plus vite que la taille de l'économie mondiale, vous avez un problème. Si on n'utilise pas une forme démocratique et pacifiée de régulation de l'inégalité, alors d'autres formes se mettront en place. L'histoire invente toujours ses propres voies et invente toujours des nouvelles façons de régler les problèmes qui peuvent être parfois très violentes et très peu conformes à ce qu'on aurait souhaité a priori si on avait pu à temps examiner collectivement ces choses-là.